Hello, welcome to Mary's Economics. Now, I don't normally talk about stuff that's in the news because I prefer to talk about the ongoing patterns in UK poverty that are evident all the time. But actually, these two things that have caught my eye today, I think probably do have a timeless quality to them. So I'm going to talk about them in kind of general terms. So the first one is there's been a press release today about a government programme called Keep Britain Working. So this is the government going on about the importance of not having people off sick, okay? And the headline that I heard on the radio was that, so much growth, so much economic growth could be released if only people who were currently off sick could be supported back into work. Okay, I'm going to leave aside my feelings about growth and I'm going to refer you over to Barry's economics to talk about that. Like, growth is a nonsense, and we shouldn't be talking about the growth of our economy. We should be talking about the well-being of our people. Okay, that's what I'm going to say about that. But in terms of health, economic inequality is driving the poor health that we suffer with in the United Kingdom. Okay. Not all of it, okay, there are some chronic illnesses, there are some disabilities, there are some life-limiting conditions, there are some infectious diseases that you could argue don't have anything to do with somebody's economic status. But the data is pretty clear that economically unequal countries are doing much worse on health, physical and mental, than countries with a more equal income distribution. Now, there are lots of reasons for that. Okay, so firstly, it's fairly straightforward, right? If you don't have enough money for a decent basic standard of living, then you're more likely to get ill, okay? Because you can't have a healthy diet that nourishes you and maintains your immune system and keeps you healthy. And there are all kinds of factors in your life that you have less control over when you have less money, like where you live. So if you are forced to live in a damp, mold-infested home that's in an area with loads of traffic and terrible air pollution, then your physical health is going to be worse than someone with more money and more choices. So there are some ways in which it's pretty self-evident that not having a huge amount of income is going to impact your health. However, the work of Kate Pickett in particular, Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, there's a book called The Inner Level, but that's just one resource that you could look at. What they're talking about is how it's the economic inequality itself that is driving the poor health. It's not just not having enough money. It's living in a culture that is constantly asking if you're good enough, if you're keeping up, if you're worthy, if you are worth enough, what you are worth, who's worth more. And this subordination, dominance and subordination hierarchy that we're living in all the time is stressful. And stress is such a massive driver of poor health and disease. Okay, so when you are working really hard, but you just don't seem to be making any progress, and the boss is getting rich, but you're not, this can lead to burnout. It can lead to status anxiety, social anxiety, performance anxiety, feelings of inferiority, but also just confusion. Because a lot of people feel like, I'm working really hard here. Why does my life feel like I'm running up an escalator going in the opposite direction? And it's because no one's really explained to you that you're not earning enough for a decent basic standard of living, and it's not your fault. It's the way the economy is organised. Now, I've read a bit about this Keep Britain Working programme, and I can't see anything in there about ensuring that the employees that we want to keep working and keep functioning are actually earning enough to keep their heads above water financially or emotionally. So I don't know where the commitment is there. And I would love to think that if they're talking about like preventing ill health in the workplace, that some of that is going to be about having conversations where employees could open up in a confidential space without fear of judgment about their fears, about their finances, right? So are they managing to keep their bills? Are they worried about Christmas? You know, and even if that is going on in some supportive workplaces, I've got to ask, what can somebody's employer, even a really nice, kind, supportive employer, do about their rent suddenly shooting up at the same time as their car has failed the MOT, at the same time as their kids all need new shoes? Because this is just the reality of the economy that we are living in. And I've said before, the cost of living crisis isn't a crisis. It's just the way things are. So addressing economic inequality is the way to make our workforce fitter and healthier. And then the other thing that I saw in the news today that I have to comment on is the really tragic story of a small chain of family-run bakeries that have operated successfully for several decades, finally having to close down, saying that hikes in business rates and employers' national insurance have made it impossible for them to continue functioning. Now, that is disastrous. And we keep hearing from the government that taxation is about making sure that those with the broadest shoulders carry the greatest burden. But year after year, it is low to middle income earners who get hit with taxation, while the richest individuals get away without paying hardly anything, it seems. And a lot of commentators out there, Rutger Bregman, Gary Stevenson, are digging into this more than I will, right? But also the biggest corporations with the highest profits are not paying their fair share in tax, while the smaller local businesses are really, really struggling. This is not fair, and it needs to be sorted out. Tax wealth, not work. Thank you for watching.